Welcome to Western New York Entrepreneurs Unleashed, the podcast that unveils the remarkable stories of local business owners running 7, 8, and even 9-figure organizations. We dive into the personal journeys that allow these inspiring leaders to live their best lives. Western New York Entrepreneurs Unleashed will offer you invaluable insight, one captivating story at a time. Brought to you by Entrepreneurs Organization of Western New York.
Hi, everyone. This is David Stearns, and I am the marketing chairperson for EO Western New York. And welcome to our very first episode of Western New York Entrepreneurs Unleashed. Now, I could not have a better guest for episode one. You're going to get to meet this guy in the next half hour, 45 minutes in great detail. But Brian was actually the first person I met in EO because he did my forum training. And he's not only been very active in EO, let's see, I'm reading everything here, Brian, a leadership trainer and corporate retreat facilitator with legacy of significance, a CEO of a Inc. 500 company with 300 employees, global chairperson of Entrepreneurs Organization, and co-chair and of the Entrepreneurial Master's Program at MIT. So it is my great pleasure to welcome Brian Brault to Western New York Entrepreneurs Unleashed. Welcome, Brian.
Oh, glad to be here, David. And I'm thrilled to be the first one. And maybe the only reason it's good to be the first one is I'm actually the second most tenured member in the chapter now at 22 and a half years. Kim Latko has actually been in a year longer than me. And she's just, she's a wonderful human being, an entrepreneur and leader. I hope you get to have her on the show as well.
Oh, we told them they all have to say yes. So that's not optional. So definitely we'll get Kim on here as well.
We're great.
So, Brian, our show here is not just about EO, but it's really about entrepreneurs in general and how people went from their earliest days to becoming successful entrepreneurs and all of the ups and downs in between. So I'm told, I didn't know this story, that your entrepreneurial journey actually started at a very young age with a hot dog stand and delivering newspapers. So tell us a little bit about your entrepreneurial beginnings.
Oh, gosh. Well, I am old enough that when I was 5 years old, microwave ovens were not a thing yet. So I had gotten a couple bucks for from a relative in a birthday card. And that spring I went to a garage sale and bought this little Presto hot dog cooker that could cook 6 hot dogs in a minute. And I just thought that was the coolest thing. So I bought it for $1. And that summer I had gone grocery shopping with my mom, and they had this hot dog stand outside of Wegmans. And I thought, well, I could do that with my hot dog cooker. So long story short, we set a date. My mom brought me back to Wegmans, fronted me the money for the hot dogs, the rolls, the condiments, Kool-Aid cups, napkins, stuff to make signs. And one Saturday, I had a hot dog stand and put signs around the neighborhood, had a ton of people come. I charged 25 cents for a hot dog, a nickel for some Kool-Aid. I had this little play school type cash register I used. And at the end of the day, I paid my mom back for all the money she fronted me, and I still had $14 left over. And heck, $14 today, finding that in your jeans after it comes out of the wash is always a nice surprise. Back then, I got the bug. I got the entrepreneurial bug because I just thought it was fun. I made money and I fed people, made them happy. And so I did it again the next year. And then a few years later, we moved across town, and there was a newspaper route that became available in our neighborhood. So I started delivering the newspaper every morning, 7 days a week, and getting up in the dark and getting out there and delivering the newspaper. And it was that was back in the day when people didn't pay with credit cards. So I had to go door to door each week and collect the money and face my customers. So if I'd been late one day that week, or I didn't shut the door correctly and the newspaper flew around, that I had to credit them. I had to deal with customer service. So at a very young age of 6th grade, I really started to kind of have that experience of kind of building a business and dealing with customers and responsibility. So it was really kind of what set me off on my journey, I think.
So I got to tell you, your parents were much better at the fundamental business lessons than mine were, because like you had a hot dog stand, mine was making smoothies. So
Oh,
this was back in the neighborhood we lived in. There was a community pool, and I would make smoothies and sell them to people around the pool. And I guess I was pretty good. People loved the smoothies. I sold a lot. You were cheap at a nickel for the Kool-Aid. I was a buck for the
hmm.
smoothie. But it turned out that I had no inventory costs because I was just raiding the kitchen and putting everything into the blender, and my mom never made me pay her back. It didn't occur to
Oh,
me till years later that there was a negative return on investment to my smoothie business. It sounds like, though, you had a very positive return factoring in all the costs.
yes, it was. But again, I did it once, and also you're younger than me, so $1 for a smoothie is probably in if you compare the years, probably pretty close.
So in your career, when did you make the leap to starting your own company?
Well, so I always, I started cutting lawns and snow blowing driveways all through high school, which is what put me through high school and college. But I would say my first real business started as a project in my senior year of undergraduate. And
Okay, so you were right out of school.
what's that?
So you were right out of school.
I was. So what happened is I had started a business on paper. So when I was a senior in college, vinyl siding on homes had been around, I don't know, maybe 5-10 years, but the intent of the vinyl siding was that it was totally maintenance free. Well, the reality is it wasn't. Just dust in the air, things like that would build up on it unless you cleaned it or washed it off. It just started to build up and got dirty. And I can remember walking to class one morning at the University of Buffalo and just going up to this building that had vinyl siding, and I just ran my finger across and realized this actually could come off pretty easy. So didn't think a whole lot of it other than had this kind of idea. And then as part of a class project in my senior year of undergraduate in the business program, you had to start a business on paper. So I started a business that was power washing vinyl siding on homes. And so then I started to get some wonderful job offers that actually were going to pay me less than what I earned to put myself through school. And my ego just wouldn't let me accept those jobs. And so I decided that let me go get my MBA, and that will help me get better job offers. Well, I started my MBA, but between my senior year in undergraduate and graduate school, I decided to start a business on paper. I'd gotten an assistantship to study for my MBA, so I didn't have to pay for school for the first time in my life. And that summer, I decided, well, hey, listen, I don't have to worry about money, so this is a chance to try this business out. So I started knocking door to door and offering to power wash people's vinyl siding on their homes. And I approached Tops Markets, a grocery store chain, right at the end of the summer before school started, and they invited me to bid on power washing one of their storefronts. And so I did that, and it ended up, I think in the end, I earned about $1 an hour for what I had bid and for what it took. And even in those days, that wasn't a lot of money. And so but I learned from that point on, they only asked me to bid on 1 or 2 more jobs. And then for a period of probably 5 or 6 years, they never asked me to bid on a job. They just gave me something to do, and I did it, and I was fair with them, but I was able to charge what it took for me to learn how to do that, whatever it was I was doing for them. And they were happy to pay me. And I built a business that way. But what happened is all of a sudden school started, my MBA program started, and Tops Markets kept asking me to do more work, and my MBA was getting very demanding. So I realized, I don't know that I can do both. I did learn enough that if I'm going to be in the MBA program, I need to be all in. And so I decided to put school on hold and try building this business, because I figured this business opportunity may never come again. School will always be there, and school is still there, but I've never went back. And I ended up building this business, and really that was the start of what eventually would become a 300-person business based in New York, but we also did a lot of work in Pennsylvania and Ohio. We also had a division in Florida, in the Sarasota-Bradenton area, that we had a pretty substantial business. That division was sold in about 2007, and then the balance of that business was sold in 2014.
Wow. So the pressure washing, tell us a little bit about how did the business evolve and what caused you to make these changes along the way?
Yeah, that's actually probably my favorite story to tell. So thank you for asking that. It all started out with power washing, and then all of a sudden, what Tops Markets asked me to do was they started to call me like Mr. Wizard, because I would just take the time to figure out whatever I could to fix things. There was one project they had this frost on the mirrors in the produce departments. And really what it was is they had these misters that would keep the produce fresh, but the water deposits on the mirrors dried and they couldn't get it off. And so they asked me if I could, because they were having their produce managers come in on Sunday nights, clearing everything out and scraping it with razor blades to get it off. Well, I was talking with my mother-in-law at the time, and she said, I use vinegar and water to get the water deposits out of the coffee pots. I wonder if that would work. So I went in and I used vinegar and water, and sure enough, it came right off. And I was able to look like a rock star. And so, they asked me what I used, and I said, well, it's a combination of acetic acid and dihydrogen oxide, which are the chemical terms for vinegar and water. And they're like, oh my God, is that safe with the produce? And I said, perfectly safe with the produce. But I kind of got known as Mr. Wizard. So they just started asking me to do all these different things. So I really grew my business with Tops Markets quite a bit. I traveled wherever their stores were. I did any kind of specialized cleaning application for them. But then there was a guy who owned a grocery store, a private grocery store, super duper, up in Niagara Falls. His name was Doug Fisher. And he asked me to start doing some work for his store. We took care of their floor care each night. We did some specialized cleaning. And whenever a Tops near one of his stores had a grand opening or reopening, he wanted to do a reopening himself. And I always did whatever we needed to do to make sure we took care of him as well. And then he sold his stores. And I thought, well, you know what? That was an investment in a relationship that didn't pan out, but that's okay. Well, a couple of years later, he landed as the head of property management for Benderson Development. And he brought me over and he said, listen, he said, I know that I was not your biggest customer. He said, but you always made me feel like I was. And he said, whenever I needed you, you jumped through hoops and you took care of me. And he said, and I've never forgotten that. And I'd like to start using you for some of what we do in these shopping centers that Benderson owns. So he started asking me, he just liked my approach, or our approach. He liked our approach to how we approach taking care of customers, regardless of what it was. And so he started asking me to do all these different property maintenance types projects around these shopping centers. And it gave us an opportunity to really build. He was very straightforward with me on what pricing needed to be in line. And so he helped me kind of adequately price or appropriately price our services. And it just started us going from a specialized cleaning company into a total facility service company. And that was really at the very front end of that industry, starting a total facility service company. And we started doing work for them up here in Western New York, throughout all their properties up here. And then they had a division in Florida that they were looking to change over some of their property management there. So they asked us if we would manage those properties for a year while they transitioned down there. And then so we did. And then once we did, they had their property management outsource all their property maintenance services to us. We did most of it in-house. We contracted some of it out, but it really just set us on a whole different kind of market and industry. And it really was a fun time.
That's pretty amazing. So, I'm just jotting down some notes. So, listening to lessons about how to figure out pricing. I know every entrepreneur struggles with that. Getting an early on lesson on the value of relationships. And it doesn't matter if it's your biggest client or your smallest client, but if you treat people well, you never know when it's going to come back to pay you back positively. But the importance, and I see so many companies are trying, especially I'm in the world of marketing, so many companies are in fire your smallest clients. It's like, no, I still pick up the phone when my smallest clients call, because those are the relationships that got us off the ground, and I want to treat those people well. But they're also the ones that sometimes come back to pay dividends many times over. And then the thing that I love is the entrepreneurial spirit of, super duper can come to you and just say, I've got a challenge. And you're like, yeah, I've got this, you figure it out. And I see that in lots of entrepreneurs, that willingness to do something they're uncomfortable doing. I guess they use the analogy of, we jump off a cliff and build the plane on the way down to the ground.
Yeah.
But it sounds like in reality, you got very comfortable doing that. Is that accurate?
It was, and originally with Tops Markets, because they were coming to me with things that they couldn't figure out. And so they gave me some grace. And so I wish I could say I'm brilliant at pricing things, but the reality was, had they asked me to continue to price things before doing the work for the first 4 or 5 years of working with them, I probably would have really struggled and may not have survived in business. But what they allowed me to do is, they knew I would be fair. They knew I would do a great job. And so they just started giving me projects, and I would give them an invoice afterwards. And maybe 1 out of every 100 invoices, they would come back to me and ask me to justify. But generally speaking, I was fair. So what I did is, I was able to do the job, look at what I had invested in it, look at what the appropriate margin was, and then give it to them after the fact. So it really took all the risk out of it for me. Okay. And then when I was working with Benderson, he just said, hey, listen, this is what the industry charges. I don't mind paying you on the higher end of that, but it needs to be within this range. But I know you're going to give me a great experience. And so I got lucky, David. I really did, because I just really, the people that I connected with trusted me and were straightforward, and they allowed me to kind of learn as I was going. So I wish I could say I was this brilliant pricing strategist, but I'm not.
So I'll share some of my stories at a later date about pricing, because boy, have I made some big mistakes there. But one of the things that I'm hearing, and this probably wasn't a linear path from graduating college to a 300-person Inc. 500 company. There are probably some ups and downs in your past. And I think it's, for a lot of entrepreneurs, it's good to hear what people have struggled with and how they got through it. So how about you? Any ups and downs that were in your entrepreneurial career?
Oh, David, we don't have enough time on this podcast for all those, but I'll give you some of the highlights. When I was early on, I really misunderstood contract labor and employees. And the Department of Labor and the New York State helped me get educated on that.
Were they happy to teach?
Yeah, probably in a more expensive way than I would have preferred. But they basically came in and said, hey, you're paying these people with a 1099. They're dedicated employees to you. You can't do that. Here's what you owe us for the fees. Here's what you owe us for penalties. And so it was a really interesting way to learn. And it almost tanked me early on, because again, I was not a sophisticated business person, nor am I today. But I was, I was just kind of on some level, living paycheck to paycheck, because I was just, work was busy, but it wasn't necessarily steady. And so when I'm using contract labor, when it should be employees, and all of a sudden you have to pay, I don't know, $30,000 or something back in the early 90s, it was a hefty bill. So that's certainly one of them. The old adage of hire slow, fire fast, was not something I learned right away. And so I held on to people longer than I should, probably still do on some level, but really, and you hear every once in a while people say, no one ever says I should have fired that person sooner. Or I'm sorry, I should have fired that person later. It's always, I should have fired them sooner, or freed them up to your competition, whatever you want to say. That is true for me, except for one person. There's one person who I let go too soon. And in the end, it was really more of a reaction to a customer than this person not doing a great job. And this person's gone on to achieve absolutely incredible things in his career. So he's probably glad that I let him go at the time, but I always regretted that. So
I agree.
I-
I think that that's always the hardest thing is when you have to let someone go. You can couch it any way that you like, but it's probably the most difficult task a CEO or a manager has, but it can be the most essential. When to go from startup, and I'm going to use that 300 person number, that's a lot of infrastructure to build. That's a lot of people to get developed. And for a lot of entrepreneurs, they hit a ceiling. And I remember when, for people listening, my wife went through Brian's Entrepreneurial Master Program. And when Vicky was in one of your classes, she came back really excited saying, every time your business doubles, half your people and half your systems can't keep up. And it was a lesson, she took home. So I want to talk to you a little bit about building people and systems. So as your business scaled, what lessons did you learn about leadership and team building?
Oh, great question. There was a point. So the business that started out as power washing and built into a 300 person company, there came a point where I had built it to, it was maybe about 100 employees. And I had built what I had envisioned to build. And I went from building a business to running a business. And I can remember coming into work one day and looking at my calendar and thinking, I don't want to do any of this. And it was important stuff. I mean, it was meeting with my controller about budgets. It was meeting with our head of HR about implementing this new compensation structure that we had, and meeting with one of our operations manager about a challenge he was having with one of his managers. And I just remember thinking, none of this motivates me. I don't really want to do this anymore. So I started to think about selling, and what I ended up doing was this, is I realized that what I really love to do is build businesses. And I also have this fundamental belief that most human beings, I think, have at least a little bit of entrepreneurial spirit in them, but so often it's just not nurtured, or they're just not in a position to take on the risk to do that. And so they don't. And so what we did is we had 5 different types of work that we did. And we also had this region in Florida. So we basically created 6 businesses within our business. Okay. And up north, based in the New York area, we divided it up by segment of business, type of business we did. And then in Florida, it was just its own region. So all the businesses were under one regional company of sorts. I mean, it was just, technically it wasn't, they weren't separate companies, but they were structured that way. And so we provided corporate-wide human resources support, accounting support, and administrative support, and then there was a leadership team. But other than that, each business had a general manager that was given, we empowered them to really run their business like it was a business. They needed to do it within our core values, and they needed to stay legal, but they could make the final decisions on who they hired, who they terminated, what they were spending on sales, what they were spending on marketing, and they had access to all their numbers, we were an open book company, and it really was incredible. That's where we went from 100 people to about 300 people in a relatively short window. And what it did for me is it did a bunch of things. One is we empowered leaders to step up and take responsibility and have the ability to make decisions of substance. It also took a lot of responsibility and pressure off of me to make decisions, because I was becoming a bottleneck in our company. But it also allowed me to now go from running a company. We brought in a COO, and the COO really kind of ran the day-to-day, and I worked shoulder to shoulder with these general managers building their businesses. And so I was able to do what I love to do. We had someone else who really ran the business, and we empowered people to step up and take leadership roles.
So Brian, as you put those people into leadership roles, were they people who came up through the organization that you developed, or did you hire into those roles?
We hired one person into that role. All the others, they were with us when we brought them on, and we empowered them, into those roles.
So this kind of leverages what you're doing today a little bit, but developing leaders is very hard for entrepreneurs. A lot of us learn to do things by the school of hard knocks. There wasn't a textbook we could follow. Every one of us, I know, an entrepreneur that reads a ton, but then you bring in somebody else to start taking over, and they don't have your background and they're not getting the same level of education. So how did you help develop those leaders? Was it internal training? Did you use external resources? Did you use someone who's like you as facilitator and trainer?
Yeah, it's a great question. Kind of a combination of those, and a lot of the decisions that I made around leadership weren't great decisions either. I took people who were really, really strong in certain roles and developed that. I put them into other roles, and again, kind of the old adage of, so often we take our best salesperson and make them a sales manager, and there's such different skill sets that most of the time that doesn't work. I had my fair share of those. My brother at the time was great at operations, and still probably one of the best operations people I've ever seen. However, being president of a company is a very different skill set, and that just wasn't the right match for him. And being my brother and having the wrong, that was a difficult time. But one of the things we did is I had joined the Entrepreneurs Organization back in 2001, and there are so many learning programs they had. So we started to bring our leadership team with us to some of these events. One of the events we went to was Vern Harnish, who is the founder of EO, had a program that he ran at Dell Computer headquarters. And so we went and met with their leadership. And we were one of many companies that was there, but there was probably 100 people in this program, and we were probably 7 of them. And we met with Dell's leadership. Wow. And they had this whole program that they kind of talked to us about systems and processes of how they developed, and took this notion of, the team that gets you to a certain level is probably not the team that gets you to the next level. And they had this approach, David, that was fascinating to me. And we brought that back to our company. And that was this. When they were first starting out, and I'm just going to use low round numbers to make it easy, they had a computer division that was just selling computers. They got it to 10 million. And they had 2 people in there that were really good at bringing it to 10 million. And so then they said, okay, well, let's separate this out. Let's take this 10 million. We'll have a $5 million education division and a $5 million corporate commercial division. And they took those people who had brought it to 10 million and said, okay, I know you're running a 10 million, but now you're going to run a 5 million education division. We need you to take that from 5 million to better than 10 million. So they would get it up to, let's say, 12 or 15 million. Then they would take that education division, take those leaders, separate them again, and say, okay, here's private education and public education. And what they did is they realized that if they looked for the same leadership to get them from 5 to 10, that got them from 5 to 10 to get them to 100 million, totally different skill sets and probably not the right people. So what they kept doing is segmenting it down by, education to private and public, to secondary, to primary education. And they kept breaking it down and kind of rinse, lather, repeat. They kept bringing them back and saying, you're the best we have at taking a business from 5 to 15 million. We just want you to keep doing that. Wow. And then all of a sudden you've got 20 divisions that are 5 to 15 million in revenue. Just brilliant stuff.
Love that strategy. How cool. Well, you mentioned something. You mentioned EO, and I want to talk a little bit about EO because it's been very big in your life, but people listening in, watching this may not know much about Entrepreneurs Organization. So sure. Would you tell a little bit about EO and the role that EO played in helping you and your business?
Sure. The EO is the Entrepreneurs Organization. It's been around for about 35 years at this point. And it is 36 years, actually. And it is a peer-to-peer organization. So there is a threshold of $1 million in annual revenue that you have to be in to join the organization. once you join the organization, it is an organization of peers. And probably in its simplest form, David, is when you're building a business and you're an entrepreneur, so often, as you referenced earlier, you kind of learn from the school of hard knocks. And rather than have everyone have to learn that way or reinvent the wheel all the time, it's an opportunity to bring entrepreneurs together to learn and grow together so that you hear how other people have been successful, how they've struggled, and you can kind of learn through them on some level. And you can come and talk about all the challenges that we have as entrepreneurs, whether it's the business side of being an entrepreneur, it's just how we live our life as an entrepreneur. And you're able to connect with people who understand what it's like to kind of be in your shoes. I joined EO originally because I had been in business like 13, 14 years at that point, and it had somewhat stagnated. I wanted to take my business to the next level, but I didn't really know how, and I knew I was going to need help. And I learned about all these great learning programs that EO had. And so I decided to jump in and give it a try. And I jumped in with both feet because, at the time it was like $2,000 to join, and it might as well have been $200,000 because I didn't have a spare $2,000. So I said, if I'm going to spend the money and I'm going to commit, I'm just going to jump in with both feet. So I did everything. I attended every local chapter event, anything that any different regions or even regions around the world was doing. I got involved in those and started to learn and travel and attend conferences. And just, I was a sponge to learn. There was an executive education program. You mentioned the Entrepreneurial Master's Program. I went through that as a student. The first year I applied, I didn't get accepted. So I applied the second year and finally got in. But what it did is it shifted the way I thought about business. I thought I was thinking about business in a big way, and I realized I wasn't. But I learned about, really how to build high-performing teams. I learned how to be very focused on the things that are most important in your business. I learned how to engage people and the importance of culture and defining core values. I learned the value and the way to actually execute on an open book management environment, and really how to, I can remember coming into the very first real big executive education program and everyone talking about how obvious it was to have a very clearly defined strategy. And I'm thinking, well, I've gotten where I am without a strategy, but then I didn't get past where I was, and so I really learned the value of kind of having that clearly articulated vision, and then a strategy of how to get there, and then the value of making sure that everyone in your organization understands the role they play in executing on that strategy, and really just started building businesses that way.
Oh, that's fantastic. Well, before we run out of time, I've got a couple last things I want to talk to you about. And no entrepreneur's journey would be complete if there wasn't a supporting cast.
Mhm.
So, a lot of people say being an entrepreneur is very lonely. I know for you and me both, EO helps reduce the loneliness, but at some point you go home and it can be difficult to be an entrepreneur in your family. So what's your support network look like, and how do you balance being an entrepreneur and being a good person in life?
Yeah. So, boy, there's a couple different things. One is I do invest in myself, and not that I want to start with myself, but I do invest in myself. So there are things that I do that because I believe in any relationship in life, you first show up as an individual. And so when you take the time to invest in yourself, whether that's just a daily routine or exercise or retreats, whatever, or learning and growing, you come back from that a better version of yourself. So you show up better in those relationships. My faith is very strong for me as well. And that's kind of like a guiding light that I use about really how to keep good balance in life. I'm married to my best friend, and really I'm really lucky to share my life with her. She's been with me before I started my business when we were just dating. And so, she's been with me since the beginning. So she kind of knew what she was getting into and has been with me the whole way. And, she grew up without a lot of money. So she didn't really have any expectations of needing money. And so she was always very supportive when we went through highs and lows of being in business. But I also, again, in the entrepreneurs organization, there is just a network of people. What I found before I joined EO was whenever I would go to weddings or parties, I would always kind of migrate towards the people who own their own business. It was just something about that pureness that I found comforting, to be able to talk to people who understood how, we as entrepreneurs feel the issues we're dealing with and how we process them and how we kind of take responsibility for them, and to have other people that got that was always really important. So when the entrepreneurs organization, well, it didn't come around, but I became aware of it, I realized, wow, this really feels like my people. And so it's been very valuable for me with that. My dad is a very important person in my life. He's still with us. He's 86 and a half. He's a great leader, and he's also a leader of good. And so he's always been someone that I could talk to that was great. And I've had some really good mentors along the way. I've had two mentors. One is a guy named Warren Rustand, who just is a phenomenal leader and lives a life of integrity. And so I look to him to help me live that way. And then Jeff Hoffman, one of the founders of Priceline.com, has really helped me kind of live out my purpose and really, feel like I make a difference in the world.
Well, that's a great segue to last thing I want to bring up today is your current endeavor and the legacy of significance. And you are really a purpose-driven individual. It's one of the things I find very inspiring about you. Love to have you just kind of tell us a little bit about why you started Legacy of Significance, what you're doing, and how you help people.
Well, thanks for asking. So I guess 7 years ago, I sold a majority stake in my current business to private equity. And about 2 years in, I could say I decided, but really we decided, they decided that, their approach to running an entrepreneurial business and my approach to running an entrepreneurial business were a little in conflict. And I'm probably the only entrepreneur who has ever had that story with private equity. But we just were kind of at odds. And I was kind of looking for a way to step away, and they beat me to it. So my ego took a blow for sure. But what it did is, we had like 9-month transition. I was part of hiring my replacement, and it was really actually a good journey. And so it ended up, that day end up being one of the best days of my life, because what it did is it freed me to spend my life really focusing on my purpose. I mean, I still have an ownership stake. I'm still on the board, but as the day-to-day CEO, I wasn't anymore. So what happened was, I said, well, I don't really want to start building a traditional business from scratch. There's certain things that I love to do that I've learned through my journey with the Entrepreneurs Organization and some leadership roles that I've had. And I love to just basically create happy people by being a positive impact in the lives of others. So what I've done is I started a business that was a passion project that was really designed around helping to lead people on their own journey of self-discovery. So we do that through things like retreats. It could be corporate retreats, forum retreats. It could be couples retreats that you and Vicky have been on. And it's really about, all of those are designed to help everyone in attendance just create more awareness, more self-awareness, and be aligned in how they achieve, whether it's corporate objectives or relationship objectives. We also do executive education programming, and we help executives or entrepreneurs and their leadership teams become aligned, learn similar content together at the same time, and then come together and figure out how they're going to put that into their business. And then we have a manager development program. Most entrepreneurial companies just don't. They're great at what they do. They put someone in a manager role, and they just don't have a manager training program. So we work with mostly entrepreneurial companies to help develop and train and prepare their frontline or mid-level managers to be impactful in their roles. So that's really what we do. And David, I get to travel the world. I do leadership development and training, and Often Jean, my wife, travels with me, and that's just a wonderful thing. But I get to wake up every day and only do what I want to do, and I love what I do. So I'm lucky at this
I
point.
guess that's the pinnacle of the entrepreneurial journey, going from when you were in your own company, looking at your calendar and saying, I don't want to do any of these things, to saying, no, I can really follow my passion, what I want to do most, be in control of it, and still find a way to build a very successful continuing career. All right, one last thing. So I need a final bit of wisdom. Some of the people listening, watching this podcast will be aspiring entrepreneurs. So if someone's in Western New York and they're thinking about jumping in the entrepreneurial world or thinking about taking their small business to the next level, what one piece of advice would you leave them with from our talk today?
It would probably be two things. One is believe in yourself, believe in yourself, believe in your gut, and take risk on yourself, coupled with recognizing that there have been people who have walked that path before, and they have all sorts of experience and wisdom. And find a mentor or find an organization that you can connect with that will help them not be alone on that journey. So trust yourself, trust your instincts and your passion. Take a bet on yourself, and find someone that's been down your path before and listen to them. And it doesn't mean you have to do everything they say, but it certainly makes it less lonely, and you'll probably make fewer mistakes.
I love that, because that belief can be hard, especially when you're having one of those down days and it feels like nothing is going right, or you find out you've been handling classification of your employees wrong and you owe this big bill. But that belief that you can do it, you will find a way, and that perseverance, it is so important. And I couldn't agree more with the find a group. I'll share from personal experience. I was always I have to figure everything out by myself. And I've been running a company now for 27 years. Yesterday was day one of my brand new forum of people who own marketing companies, so I can start to learn new things from people in my industry that in 27 years I haven't learned. And day one was already mind-blowing. I can't wait for day two. So Brian, Thank you so much for being part of our very first episode. Really appreciate it. If people want to reach out and get in touch with you, what's the best way to connect?
My email is brian@life-bydesign.com. Or you can reach out and call me, and I'm sure maybe you can put that information in the notes.
Sure we will. Thank you so much, and thank you everybody for watching our inaugural episode of Western New York Entrepreneurs Unleashed.
Thank you for joining us on this episode of Western New York Entrepreneurs Unleashed, and another inspiring story from a local business leader who scaled their company. If you are ready to take your business to new heights and eager to embrace transformative growth, then don't miss our future episodes. Subscribe to this podcast today and be part of our community of leaders, builders, and change makers. Together, we're committed to moving the world forward by unlocking the full potential of entrepreneurs, one success story at a time. Brought to you by Entrepreneurs Organization of Western New York,